Hello, the purpose of this video from the Nebraska Board of Public Roads Classifications and Standards, or NBCS, is to share the board's process and approach for developing, supporting, approving, and implementing multi-project programs and strategies that provide additional flexibility in design and maintenance standards for highways, roads, and streets. A handout is available on the board's website, the web link shown in the middle of your screen, and is recommended reading to supplement this video. It has an introduction to practical design, a process flowchart, and an application form with instructions, all of which were approved by the board on April 16, 2021. Throughout this video, the word program will be used as a short way of saying multi-project program or strategy. Before addressing the process, there is a quick overall review of board standards and what led up to multi-project programs and strategies. Until recently, if NBCS minimum design or maintenance standards could not be met, there were two options available. Request a relaxation of standards from the NBCS or change the standards. The first option applies to a specific project and is usually requested in the preliminary engineering phase of the project, while the second option requires rulemaking, an extensive effort, and therefore only occurs once every few years. A third option is now available, a multi-project program. It is not a new standard, but it does allow flexibility with current NBCS standards, and it could be an interim solution potentially leading to changing the standards, or option number 2, via rulemaking. It is required that NDOT, counties, and municipalities work in cooperation with the NBCS to establish a program prior to its implementation. Note that the NBCS does not approve designs, rather, it would be agreeing to allow an entity to not meet certain of its standards. NBCS standards are based on criteria, mainly geometric criteria such as lane width, shoulder width, horizontal curvature, and vertical curvature. If a standard cannot be met for a particular project, counties and cities are required to request a relaxation of standards for that project from the NBCS. This will remain the same. However, LB 82, passed in 2019 and formalized in State Statute 39-2113, paragraph 7, allows more flexibility in meeting those standards. A program, which implies multiple projects or works, can now be established. Projects or works conforming to such a program would have board pre-approval, eliminating the need for the board to review and grant a relaxation of standards for each of those individual works or projects. Strictly speaking, bringing a program or strategy to the NBCS for approval is not a relaxation of standards, even though it involves not meeting board standards. A relaxation of standards applies to only one project and is governed by the regulation Title 428, Nebraska Administrative Code 2-004. The terminology used in the state statute and shown on this slide, practical design, flexible design, context-sensitive design, asset preservation, reflect a performance-based approach in recognition that standards are a good starting point, but there are many factors beyond geometrics that go into decision-making when designing and constructing highways, roads, and streets. The statute allows the NBCS, NDOT, counties, and municipalities to cooperate and agree upon programs based on such design practices, typically referred to as practical design. Practical design is a nationwide movement or trend to rebalance limited funds toward the need or the problem, where asset preservation and safety performance are the focus. Strict adherence to geometric dimensional criteria could lead to over-design, resulting in unnecessary costs or may be inappropriate for the roadway context. Practical design emphasizes the primary problem and need, extending the life of the asset, and on benefits, cost versus performance. Focusing funding on the primary problem or need in constructing projects intends to provide substantial overall benefit at a reasonable cost to the public. This allows savings to be invested in other roadways, thus improving the overall roadway network. Proving that typically involves cost-benefit analyses, best value analyses, and/or life cycle analyses. It may take into account the needs and values of the community, be it county, municipality, or whatever local community, to enable projects that balance safety while making the improvements in a manner that fits the surroundings and provides an overall benefit to the public. There are different reasons to request a program. Usually these are recurring situations on roadways similar to each other, having similar characteristics, and that applying an NBCS standard costs more than it benefits, such as, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. In other words, there is no significant relevant crash history, and building to the standard just for the sake of satisfying the standard would be overbuilding. Safety performance, driver expectancy, and uniformity are not substantially or materially improved by building to the standard. Mitigation features introduced with the design might offset the change in performance resulting from not meeting the standard. For example, adding rumble strips at the edge line. If community needs and values are primary considerations, such as context-sensitive design, the benefits of context-sensitive design are often more qualitative than quantitative. As you may have realized from the previous slide, practical design is not a workaround or a way of avoiding standards. It doesn't sacrifice safety. A program is not a clever way of avoiding standards. Safety is perhaps the uppermost concern of the NBCS, and programs won't change that. So continue embedding safety-conscious design as part of your design process and giving due consideration to safety issues. Now for the approval process, as adopted by the board at its April 16, 2021 meeting. The entire process is shown on one page, shown here on this screen, and in a handout available on the board's website, shown on the first slide in this presentation. The following discussion will explain that handout. This screen is difficult to read because of size limitations, so the following screens will look different than the handout for the sake of clarity. The process starts when an entity applies for a program. The board views this process as a guide. As stated previously, it doesn't preclude reasonable adjustments for particular applications. That's why this is called a typical process. The application is submitted to NDOT Board's Liaison Services section, just like any relaxation of standards request would be, but the process will be different. Much of the same information required for a relaxation of standards request is also required for a multi-project program, but unlike a relaxation of standards request, the board is proposing an application form. Since relaxation of standards requests are regulated by the Nebraska Administrative Code, and these new program requests are not, the purpose of the application form is to communicate what the board will likely need in order to consider such requests. A complete submittal will minimize back and forth information requests and get through the process quicker. The application form is 2 pages, and there is another page with instructions. It is very important to demonstrate that there is an overall benefit to the public and to the network of highways, streets, and roads. Include enough information for the NBCS board to make an informed decision. The form is, well, only a form, a means of communicating. Add sheets and reports as needed. Analyses such as costs and benefits, best value, and life cycle can be attached. Visuals, photos, and even videos can be submitted to help the board understand. Requests and presentations need to be thorough and objective, providing facts, supporting data, and justification. There needs to be more justification than simply not being able to afford to build to standards. When you review the form, note that the applicant will propose conditions and commitments that it believes should be a part of the Memorandum of Understanding, or the MOU. An example is building or installing certain features such as signs, delineation, and rumble strips that mitigate the effects of not meeting standards. The board may, in approving the program, add conditions and commitments. NDOT's Board's Liaison Services will review the application and request further information and clarification as needed. All correspondence, in writing or email, is done via Board's Liaison Services. A board committee consisting of 5 members likely will be assigned to review and make recommendations to the full board. Likely, because of the nature of these types of requests, which can potentially cover many roadways on one application. The committee can request any information or clarification through Board's Liaison Services, and, if desired, the applicant may give a presentation to the committee. The committee expresses its non-binding opinion and prepares a report with recommendations to the full board. If the committee favors the proposal, NDOT's legal office may be consulted for their review of the proposal, since they will likely be involved later in drafting a Memorandum of Understanding. If the committee is not in favor of the proposal, it will communicate the reasons to the applicant and to the board. The applicant then has 3 choices. The first is to make changes, which are submitted to Board's Liaison Services. The second is to proceed without changes and take its chances with the full board. Again, NDOT's legal office reviews the proposal. The third choice is to cancel the request. The remainder of the process, assuming the applicant hasn't canceled the request, picks up on the right side of the screen where NDOT's legal office reviews the proposal. The full board will be in receipt of the committee's recommendation. The board considers the request at a public meeting. The applicant would usually make a presentation at this meeting. The graphic indicates board meeting number 1 because a second meeting will be necessary to sign the MOU if all is well. The board decides to approve or not approve. If it does not approve, the process stops. If approved, a Memorandum of Understanding is drafted specifically for the proposed program after the meeting and reviewed by a board representative. The MOU will be forwarded to the applicant for review and signature by the governing body. This shows the case where the governing body acts per its procedures at a public meeting and signs the MOU without changes. If the governing body chooses to make changes to the Memorandum of Understanding at this point, the board will need to decide to accept or not accept the changes. The governing body's changes to the Memorandum of Understanding are returned to Board's Liaison Services. Changes will be reviewed by a board representative or possibly at a public meeting by the full board, or possibly both, depending on the changes. On the one-page handout of this process provided on the board's website, the arrow points to the NBCS committee as the receiver of the MOU changes. Physically, though, the changes are sent to Board's Liaison Services, but the committee or a designated board member would likely review the changes anyway, and is so shown that way on the handout. The screen you are looking at is correct. All correspondence in writing or email is done via Board's Liaison Services. Once the governing body has properly executed the MOU, The NBCS board will make its motion to accept and sign the MOU at a public meeting. Although unlikely, the applicant could make another presentation at this public meeting if that is desired or needed. This is shown on your handout, but not shown here. If the governing body made changes as shown in the upper track on the screen, and the changes are not acceptable to the board, the process stops until agreement can be reached or the applicant either cancels the request or doesn't respond. Board's liaison services will distribute the executed memorandum of understanding to the parties. And that's the process, which provides some structure for these requests. It is a process that could be adjusted over time as all stakeholders gain experience with these programs and strategies. When considering a request for a program, the board anticipates focusing on 5 primary considerations. The following is a brief discussion of each. A substantial overall benefit or a net overall benefit is required by Statute 39-2113, paragraph 7. In not meeting the standards, the applicant must quantify the benefits of the strategy or, in the case of context-sensitive design, qualitatively state the benefits. The board will want some assurance that safety performance, driver expectancy, and uniformity with other similar roadways in the network are as good or better than the existing design. Analyses must be well thought out and based on industry-recognized research and policy, such as AASHTO, TRB, FHWA, and other recognized sources, policies, and methods. 1969 legislation anticipated, or at least had the stated goal of upgrading all highways, roads, and streets to NBCS standards. For the past 50 years and longer, entities have been working toward this, resulting in today's system that is, in a large part, uniform across the state and mostly meeting driver expectancy. However, some roads may not have been upgraded, and often that was due to a lack of funding. The board does not anticipate approving a program that accepts such roadways as they are, believing that entities must continue to strive to improve them in terms of safety performance, driver expectancy, and uniformity. There must be reasonable uniformity and satisfaction of driver expectancy existing for roadways included in the request. One way that may satisfy this consideration is to show that roadways included in the proposed program have been constructed in compliance with historic design standards, whether new, reconstructed, or 3R standards, or criterion, formal guidelines, or the industry's prevailing standard of care at the time it was constructed or improved. It is important for applicants to accurately describe the primary problem or problems, or need or needs, for roadways included in a proposed program, how funding will address those, the net overall benefits, and why it makes good sense to not build to board design or maintenance standards. Any proposed program must demonstrate that driver expectancy and system uniformity will be maintained. In other words, drivers won't be confronted with something unfamiliar or uncharacteristic, and roadways will be reasonably like other roadways similarly classified after the project or projects are built. One of the cornerstones of practical design is that it allows limited funding to be spread over more improvement or maintenance projects. A proposal, therefore, should show how the program will improve the overall system or network of roadways. Cost savings alone will not lead to board approval. Furthermore, since the program proposes to not meet board standards, justification must be provided for each non-standard value based on analysis, industry guidelines, research and/or standards of care. There should be a technical basis for not meeting standards. For example, conformity to guidelines adopted by the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, or AASHTO. For Nebraska DOT projects and programs, refer to State Statute 391316. This screen summarizes primary considerations when the board decides on proposed programs. As with the process discussed earlier, the board may need to adjust over time as experience is gained, but these considerations are a starting point. A proposal needs to make common sense and also fit within the context of the entire system or network of roadways. The purpose of this video was to share the board's proposed process for practical design programs and strategies. The NBCS cooperates with the Nebraska Department of Transportation, counties, and municipalities to get these programs approved. All questions and comments are to be directed to Board's Liaison Services staff. See the contact information on this screen.